What's up everyone, it's DevBird here, and in today's episode we're going to do basic interactions with our dialogue system. I went ahead and implemented our dialogue system, and if you're wondering where it came from, you can view it in my older videos on dialogue systems. Now you might be thinking, it's super easy to do basic interactions, right? And it is, but I'll show you the right way to do it, using class inheritance and overriding base methods. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, first things first is that we're going to create a game manager. And so let's create a C# script and call it game manager. Let's open that up. Now, you might be wondering, why are we using a game manager and what is a game manager? So basically, the game manager is the manager of managers. So if you think about it this way, here's our game manager, and it's going to have access to all our other managers, or any other part of our game. And so if we ever want access to something else, we can always refer to the game manager. And so, what do we want access to do interactions, right? Well, we need to have access to our player's position. That's really important. So we're simply going to create a public transform and call it player. But we also need to make this a singleton. And I've done it in the past, but the way we do that is do public static game manager and call it instance. And so the static means that there's only going to be one of it, and you'll be able to refer to anywhere. But we also have to initialize it. So we're making an awake. We're going to say if instance is equal to null, that means that it's not equal to anything, then we can set it equal to this, and this being this script. And so we'll always have access to this script no matter what, because there's only going to be one of it. And so now we'll always have access to the player's position, or I guess more specifically, we'll always have access to their transform, but through their transform we can get their position. So let's go to our managers, and let's put this game manager on here. And you see here I have a dialogue manager and an audio manager. If you don't have a manager, you can just create empty object, call it manager, and put it on there. But I did this ahead of time. If you followed along the dialogue system, you'll also have this too. But if you don't, that's no problem. You'll still get something out of this video. So now that we have our game manager in here, we need access to our player's position. So we have our player here, and we're going to drag in the GFX. So we don't want to drag in the player because this is just the holder of the graphics. We want the position of the graphics, not the position of the thing holding the graphics. So make sure you do that. And so now we have access to our player's position anywhere in any other script. So now that we have that, we can create a folder. We'll call it utility, and we'll create a new script, call it interactable. Alright. And so we're just going to get rid of some stuff. And basically, what we're going to do is we need to check if the player is within a certain range of the game object that this is on. So in order to do that, well, let's first create a float, and let's call this interact range. Oops, not range. And then we'll say if vector2.distance. So this is going to be the distance between two game objects. And I guess more specifically, the position of two game objects. And we're going to throw in this game object, and we'll just do that by saying GameObject.transform. And it's asking for a vector2, so we got to put the position. And then we're going to need the position of our player, and we've already we can get that by going to our game manager and going to the instance. That's the singleton we created, and we can get the player. This is the transform of the player, and then get their position. And then we have to make it less than interact range, and we can do something. So to summarize, we're getting the vector2 distance, the distance between two objects. We're getting the position of this game object that the script is on, and then our player's position, and we're checking if it's less than our interact range, which is, we're going to set that later. So what do we do if our player is in range? Well, if our player is in range, we're going to create a public virtual void, we call it interact. And you might be wondering what this virtual word means. It basically means that it allows us to override this method. If we didn't have the virtual, then we could not override this method in other scripts. And I'll show you what that is later, so don't worry about it now. And we're not going to put anything in here. We're just going to leave that blank. And then we're going to check if the player is inputting some key, and say get key down. In my case, I'm going to press Z. And if we press Z, then we interact. And so this doesn't really do anything yet. And that's fine. And I'm going to go over to my dialog folder. If you don't have one, that's fine. You can create any other script or just watch along. I'm going to call this dialog trigger. And then I'm going to derive from interactable. So this is the script we just made, and it's going to have all of this information in here without us even having to do anything. So this might as well be in here. And so now that we have this set up, we can do public. Remember how I said we can override that method now? So now let's go override void, and it gives us options to which method we want to override, and we want to override our interact method. And we don't really need to call the base. If we called the base, then what would happen is if we had code here, it would call this code. If we didn't have base, then it would not call the code. So let's just debug.log real quick. And let's just see what it does. Let's say we got called. Okay. So I'm going to take this test NPC that I have over here, and I'm going to drag in my dialog trigger, and I'm going to change the interact range to 5, let's say. It probably shouldn't start at 0. Let's just default it to 2. And so we see here that our test NPC, the only script that they have is dialog trigger, and the only code dialog trigger has is this little interact code, or this little interact method. And so with this method alone, we can walk up and press Z, and then say we got called. So you can see there that in any script we can derive from interactable, and with just this one little method right here, public override void interact, we have a basic interaction system. And so now, instead of having to do all of this in every single script that you want to use to interact with an object, you only have to have this one script, and then you can just derive from it, and then there you go. And so let us now do some quality of life stuff. So we can't really see how far you can interact with this, so let's do some quick coding. And we're going to do a private void on draw gizmo selected. So when we select this object that the script is on, we're going to do something. And we're going to do gizmo.color equal to color.yellow, and gizmos.drawWire sphere, and transform.position interact range. So what this is going to do is it's going to draw a yellow sphere on the object that I'm selecting from the center of it, and the radius is going to be our interact range. And so let's see what that looks like. And so there, we have this yellow circle, and this shows us how far we need, or how close we need to be to interact with this object. And you can see that if we adjust the interact range, it's going to adjust in real time. And so you can see the interact range in your editor. And now you might be thinking like, well, what if I want to have a really unique shape, like a star or a square or a triangle for the interact range? Because it's not all, you don't always want a circle, right? Well, you can use on trigger enter if you have like an actual collider on the object, but I advise you to try your best to stick with the range checker that we have here, because checking collisions is a little bit more expensive on your CPU. So this way is a lot more inexpensive, but if you have to do it the other way, try to do it as little as possible. So let's continue, and let's see how we can actually start some dialogue. So I'm gonna make a public dialogue base, call this db, and instead of doing a debug.log, we're going to go dialog manager.instance.enqueue dialog db, no, not you, db, and let's do that, and wait for it to compile. And so now we have a db here, and we're going to put in our initial dialog that I made. It says, "Hello, fellow NPC, I'm Link, but currently we don't have a way to get the next line." And so let's see how we can do that real quick. So we're going to go to our dialog manager, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and make an update function. And we're going to check if we are inputting get key down code.z. But first we need to be inside of a dialog, so if in dialog, because we wouldn't want this to be called if we weren't in a dialog. And we're going to get the next line, and in order to do so, we're going to dequeue the dialog, I believe. Yeah. We're going to dequeue the dialog. So I'm going to go up to this NPC, and see what happens is the text gets completed instantly. And so why is this happening? This is happening because our interact key in our next line key is the same button, Z. So it opens it up and gets the next line instantly. So how can we fix that? So the way we're going to fix this is that we're going to create a small little buffer where we cannot get to dequeue dialog for a very short time, like maybe a tenth of a second, something like that. So in order to do that, we're going to create a new IEnumerator. Let's just put it over here with our other IEnumerator. IEnumerator, let's call this buffer. And basically we're going to yield return new wait for seconds, and we're going to wait for maybe 0.1f, and we're going to create a new variable. We'll create a private pool, call it buffer, and we're going to start coroutine, and we're going to start the buffer. Probably shouldn't call them the exact same thing, actually. We'll call this buffer timer. Okay, and we'll say if buffer is true, then we'll just return. And buffer is going to start off as true. So when we enqueue a dialog, buffer is going to be true, and then after 0.1 seconds, we're going to set buffer equal to false. So when we enqueue the dialog, buffer is true, and then it's not going to get to here, because if it's true, then we return out of the method. And then after a tenth of a second, buffer will be false, and then we can get the next line. Actually, we need to move if buffer down over here, because if we have it up here, then the very first text is going to, won't be able to type anything. So we need to make sure that it's only when we are currently typing. If we're not typing, then it's fine. So now, there you go. If you open up the dialog, it works perfectly fine. And we get the next one, and yeah, it works great. So that's how we can use our basic dialog, and how we can use the same key, interact, to also get the next line without having any issues. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and see how you can use this basic interact for a bunch of other things, like well, here we have interacting with NPCs, but let's say I want to interact with this chest over here. I could create a script called chest trigger, and then just have it derived from interactable, and then boom, there you go. And you can also have a second interactable, and not have a input get down key code. And what that will allow is an interaction to happen as soon as you get in range. So you can see how versatile this script is. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright, I'd like to thank my Patreons, Bay, Emerson, Kirijo, Polybius, and Yoan. Thank you guys for supporting me. If you want to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/devbird. You can also join my Discord, link in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.